So, Rebecca, we have all sorts of problems this morning.
I'm feeling old as fuck this
Me
morning.
too. You know, I don't know how old fuck is, but I feel as old as it. Let's read some emails and respond. What do you say?
Okay, I'll try not to have another massive hot flash during the email reading.
Well, if you do, just feel free to sweat it up and fling off that blanket and air out your pits.
So
like you
bad.
did when you came in my house this morning.
It was so bad. I was so sweaty, but back at it for the people here.
Yeah. Anonymous psych major wrote in. She said, "Hello, I am 19. I have little to no sex drive, and I find it hard to become aroused. I have a lovely boyfriend, and he completely respects this, but I used to experience regular sexual urges and experiences as a teen and want to be able to experience those again like I used to. I have been raped when I was 13 by a peer, but I've never felt affected by it, at least not as much as by my childhood trauma, which was different, it sounds like. I've had I've had sex previously post-rape and enjoyed it, if that makes sense. Does that sentence make sense to you? I'm diagnosed with PTSD, among other things. I'm not sure how to feel open to sex and comfortable with the thought mentally. I'm also on 150 milligrams of Zoloft, decreased from 200 milligrams recently, and I am also on hormonal birth control. Do you think I should accept the lack of sex drive that I experience, or is there hope for me wanting sex again? Thank you." Rebecca, what do you think?
So I know that some medications really impact sex drive. Is Zoloft?
Yeah.
So that could be a huge factor here.
Yeah. And birth control as well.
Yeah. So it could be really medication induced. And if, you want to look at that, I don't know if there's a reason that your medications recently went up.
Went down from 200 to 150. But still.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Zoloft takes 2 weeks to get out of your system. Anyways, not that matters. So, yeah, I would do some investigating about the medications if it's something that you really miss. There's also kind of looking at a wider range of what intimacy could mean with your partner and seeing if there's safe touch that is enjoyable. I didn't say this last time a sex question came up, and I felt I had really messed up, which is that sometimes these things are physical. So if you've ever seen a pelvic floor specialist, which they can be impossible to get into, but
Ba-dum-bum.
Yeah, so that might be something is there something physiological going on here?
Right. Yeah.
And then it could be mental.
Yeah.
Maybe the safety of your relationship is making you feel like you don't have to have sex. Maybe the stress of what's going on in other parts of your life is, making you feel less sexual. There's so many factors that can be going on.
Yeah. You were raped when you were 13 and you have PTSD from that. It sounds like, you say you have PTSD, and that could be from the rape, obviously, but it could also be from other things. But it's not uncommon to have sexual trauma and to have libido confusions, if you will, that are along these lines. You're saying that previously to being in this relationship, you enjoyed sex and you had a libido, but now that you have a boyfriend and you feel safe, you don't have that anymore. And, it can be complicated. But as Rebecca is laying out in her order here, the first things you want to look at when it comes to libido, given your presentation here, would be the medications. It's hard to address this, though, if you really need the Zoloft to function and if the birth control is needed, if there's not other options. Sometimes people take it for even other reasons other than birth control, right? So, but to answer your question, do you have hope? Absolutely. Should you have hope? Yeah, absolutely. You're 19 and I would
There's
assume
a lifetime of hope.
I would assume that there is one or two things, and maybe some sacrifices. Like maybe there's a different med that doesn't work as well, or a different birth control that isn't as convenient, or maybe there's a different thing that you can do in your relationship. I'm just assuming that there's something there. There's also just a possibility that I'll throw this out there. It sucks to think this, but that you're just not attracted to your boyfriend, and it's affecting your libido. He's a lovely guy, and you love him, and you feel safe with him, but he just doesn't crank your chain, and sometimes that happens.
Yeah, one of the things that comes up often in my sex therapy training is, are people not having sex because the sex isn't good? And we're not going to ask people to have bad sex.
Yeah, exactly. Anonymous patron, she wrote in and says, she wrote in. I like it. I've been listening to almost every episode now for 3 years.
Wow.
And I have finally convinced my husband to go to marriage counseling online. So far, it's going well and really improving our relationship. We have 2 beautiful kids who are very much wanted. Recently, I got a major shock to discover I was pregnant despite using the IUD, which has a failure rate of just 0.8%. I have since removed the coil and am continuing this pregnancy. It's a lot to get our heads around, but abortion isn't even a discussion for us. We know we want the baby, even though we just aren't sure how we will manage. Any advice for me on how to deal with this? I feel like the supports in place for unplanned pregnancy advice is more for teens or 20s, not for someone who's married and in their 30s. Thanks, and love the pod. Any response to this, Rebecca?
Yeah, that's a huge adjustment. And I don't know the gap between the ages of the kids. But yeah, you're going to need a lot of community support. 3 kids is a lot. So I would just ask for help in any way that you can. If you've never read Bringing Baby Home by the Gottmans, it'd be an interesting book to look at. And it's just going to be a huge adjustment for your family. I also don't know how old you are, but
30s.
30s. This pregnancy may be radically different than your other pregnancies if you're much, much older.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that came to mind when I read this email is that me and my little brother are this, in a way. My little brother specifically was conceived with the IUD still in.
Wow.
And I was conceived when the IUD had a complication. My mom went to the doctor, and the doctor took it out and said, well, we'll give it time to heal, and we'll put the IUD back in a month. And my mom said, well, what am I supposed to do for the next month? And he said, it'll be fine. And that was me.
Oh, my God.
So, but my little brother was conceived during the IUD being there, and my mom found out and had to have the IUD removed.
And he was number 4.
And he was number 4. And he was, and I'm like 7 years after my older siblings. And my younger brother's like 6 or 7 years after me. And my parents swear up and down that they wanted to have 4 kids. But that does not seem to be in the data, if you will. Because it's a very similar situation. My parents actually, to the anonymous patron, they had 3 kids, and they're in their 30s. Like 35 about, and they find out that they're pregnant. Again, they swear up and down they were planning on having 4 kids. They weren't doing things to enact that plan. But and honestly, I believe my parents convinced themselves since that it was absolutely what they wanted. But me and my younger brother don't feel unwanted or anything by any means. But point is that the IUD, I'm sure, is more effective today than it was in 1970. But yeah, it used 0.8%. That means that it happens sometimes. So you're in that category, and I guess
out of every 100 people using, out of every 100 times someone has sex with the IUD, and
I think it's per year. Is
per
it not?
year.
Yeah, they give the method to a number of people and instruct them to use it correctly. But so it accounts for people not using it, like strict. Anyway, but my other thing that I will say is that you're saying, how do I deal with this? And it kind of sounds like an emotional, existential, how do I deal with this? Because it wasn't what you were planning to do. It's an unplanned pregnancy, and it's a complete game changer to your life. And in our current mainstream American world of very planned pregnancies, it can be quite a shock. Like, wait, this was not how I was planning my life. I have a job or...
Right, professionally, financially,
yeah,
family-wise, where you live, how you live, what you can do,
yeah,
how you spend your time, your identity. All of these things go into the tumbler when you realize that you're pregnant.
Yeah, maybe you have to move because you don't have enough space, or you don't feel like you have enough space. And yeah, absolutely, it's a huge adjustment. I don't think I've ever thought about this, but this is the way things used to be.
Yes.
It was really hard to plan these things in the past, and it would really upend people. I don't know if I have any direct advice other than to just appreciate just how much of an adjustment that it is, and maybe even some anger, right? Some resentment, not at the child, but at just like, fuck, I thought that this IUD was, I put this in
for
thinking,
a reason.
Yeah, I didn't, we weren't using other methods with like, well, in the off chance we get pregnant, then, we'll consider it a blessing. I thought the IUD, especially the ones that have hormones in it, it's almost an impossibility that you're going to be pregnant. So, it can be, you can be angry, and that's not the kind of, there's no card that you can give at a baby shower that's like,
whoops, congratulations,
yeah.
Right.
If you ever want to come over to my house and scream into a pillow, feel free to do that. There's not a lot of support for that, I think, maybe particularly for women,
And this is so interesting. This keeps coming up this week, and this is I'm in my reproductive justice chapter week for my class. And, there's... in our country, it's so polarized, the idea of whether or not to have children, and the reproductive justice movement tends to have a more nuanced conversation. Like, hey, this is a big deal. This really shifts things. Your ability to decide or not to decide when this happens, will impact your life forever.
What are you saying?
So the conversation in our country tends to be like, yes, have an abortion, or no, abortion is bad. Like, those tend to be the two conversations about pregnancy. Or, congratulations, having a baby is the greatest thing that can ever happen to you.
I see.
Or, I don't want to have kids. But a more nuanced conversation of, like, this is hard, or this will change everything, and yet I'm going to do it anyways. Or going from 1 kid to 2 kids is really hard, and then going from 2 kids to 3 kids. I've heard some women say, like, their lives are over until the last kid is 18 because managing 3 kids in our culture is so difficult. So, these are really, really big choices. And the reproductive justice movement tends to have a more nuanced conversation about that.
Yeah, yeah. Anonymous patron and dedicated Hondonian, they say.
Like, you drive a Honda, or you believe in Kirk?
I've never heard the term, but I'm both flattered and confused and scared of the responsibility. Because, there's like Freudian and Kleinian and Fairburnian and Bowenian. And now there's Hondian. No, it's not. So I thought it was
Hondoian?
No, it's Hondian.
Hondian.
It also could be Hondanian. Hondanian? I don't know. But it's a lot to take on.
This is a movement.
She says, some months ago, my partner and I sought out a couples therapist to help us through a rough time. We saw her twice together, then once each ourselves. We both thought she wasn't a good fit, so we looked for another therapist. I recently learned that my I recently learned that during my partner's individual session with her, our therapist had encouraged him to break up with me. She called me a word that's hard to translate into English that basically suggests that I believe that laws don't apply to me, and she told him to leave me. I'm really glad that he disagreed with her. We are still together, and we worked things out beautifully. I was disturbed to know that she'd said that. Our sessions were all pretty tame, with some teary moments and discomfort here and there. I'm genuinely not sure how she jumped so fast to such an intense conclusion. I feel insulted and hurt. There is something particularly painful about seeking help and then that help itself causing harm. It also upset me because I think it was mainly stigma-based. I work in sex work, which is legal in our country. And this was a topic of discussion in one of the 2 sessions that we had together. Just chiming in. Yeah, I was wondering about how many sessions this was because it sounded like very few. But then I was wondering, well, maybe it was more. But it sounds like it was 2 together and then one individual.
4.
We chose this therapist specifically because her page mentioned that she had experience treating people in my field of sex work. But after being made to take time during the sessions to explain structures and standards that exist in my work, we discovered that her experience amounted to anecdotal information from her former escort friends. What can I do as a client to protect myself from stigma like this? And what do you think can be done in the world of clinical therapy to shift the way we see sex work and thus treat sex work clients? What do you think?
So there are both word of mouth networks between the sex workers that I know of clinicians that support them. And then there are websites for people who say that they're really pro sex work. So I would say really check out a network recommendations. This is very common. This is very common with LGBTQ stuff that people say, like, I'm LGBTQ informed, and it just means like they want desperately to be an ally and see queer clients, but they actually know nothing about queer culture and what makes queer relationships different than straight relationships. So sadly, I'm not surprised by this at all. But I do think really sussing people out. And there are tons of therapists who used to be sex workers or maybe still are. So, that's out there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm trying to remember if in the email it directly indicates that the therapist was rejecting or didn't like the wife because of the sex work, or if that was just a guess that the anonymous patron was making.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, I wish we knew this word. Like, I'm very interested into what this word is. I mean, is there something else about this client that made the therapist feel like, I'm guessing like unethical, or I'm trying to think if there's an English word, narcissistic or something where you think that ordinary rules don't apply to you.
Yeah. Self-centered or psychopathic is another word that I might think of with an individual who doesn't care about laws or norms or anything. But I just want to ask you, like, as a couples counselor, that's not the point of those 2 individual sessions, right? Is to inform the person that this relationship is a no-go. Well, so I'll tell the very rare scenario where something like this might be said legitimately. And every therapist is going to be different. And this applies to individual therapy too. If you're talking with someone and they're talking about their relationship, and even if they directly ask you, do you think I should be in this relationship? Which we will get those kind of questions sometimes. It's a complicated question to answer. On one hand, we don't answer questions like that because how do we know? We can't tell people what to do. On the other hand, there are times when we have opinions. Do we state those opinions? What's going on?
The mic is bouncing like crazy. I don't know if it's
because I'm kind of kicking the table.
I'm trying, with my stigmatism, I'm trying not to focus on it, but my eye is like, okay.
I was kicking the table, or I was
Okay.
pushing it with my knee, and then it was
It's like,
it was also
is
pushing
there
you.
an earthquake? Like, I'm trying to focus, but the mic is like, okay, we're back at it.
You don't like long things like
Right
waving around in your face?
Like, yeah, and with my stigmatism, this stuff, anything like this makes me crazy because it's like
Okay.
my brain is just like,
No, I get it. I can relate. What do I say? So in the beginning of my career, before I knew what I was doing, I would have what I would call normal, non-therapist, everyday citizen reactions to my clients, whether they're couples or individuals, about their relationships and whether or not they should be in the relationship. And I would form opinions about it. I'd be like, oh, this marriage shouldn't last, or it is doomed, or she should divorce him. This isn't going to work. Or this relationship should not break up. It's another side of things. And over time, especially with couples, I learned that opinion was based on very little information, because at the core of the vast majority of relationships is a very amorphous, poetic thing that motivates people to be together. For example, I might have a couple where from the outside and the inside, it just looks like they don't like each other very much, and they fight a lot, and there's not a lot to redeem the relationship, and they complain a lot, and they don't have a lot of positive things to say about their relationship, and there's a lot of strife and a lot of difficulty, and it's a struggle. But at the core of their being, they love each other, and they're never going to leave each other. That's just a fact. There's that. And then sometimes as a therapist, I wonder, well, is the person not realizing what is possible? Did they come from an even worse scenario with their parents? And are they settling? Do they not understand that there's a potential better world? But, these are questions that I, have going on in my mind. And then I wonder, do I have an agenda? Is there some kind of countertransference that's it's likely it's actually happening? So before I do anything about it, there's a lot of contemplation, a lot of thought, and a lot of self-reflection. And I've learned to be very cautious about that, because once you put your stake in the ground, your flag into an area of just like, I have now declared that I clinically believe that you should leave this person, it's really hard to take that back.
yeah. And what if the person doesn't leave that person?
Right. Yeah.
Then what do you do as that person's therapist?
Right. And this is just good advice just for friends and family members too, by the way, in a similar manner.
Well, and I always say, like, I spend an hour a week with you. I have no idea how you live the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I also just know what you bring to this session, right? Like, sometimes people bring their lowest functioning selves to the session because you're a safe person to do that. Or they bring their lowest functioning relationship to you because that's safe. And so you're not seeing the full picture or understanding all the dynamics.
Yeah.
I mean, it is interesting in sex therapy where there's this moment where, the couple's like doing whatever they're doing. And I don't have to say, but I'm like, hey, here could be the next phase of intimacy work that we could do. This is what one avenue that sex therapy could be. And that reaction is always really interesting. I mean, usually people are like, I don't want to do it. It's like, okay, then,
Meaning they aren't ready, or they don't want to be closer to their partner.
Either way. Yeah. I mean, doing the work is really hard. And this couple sounds like they were willing to do the work. And so it's interesting. I'm wondering what was going on for the therapist that they felt like they had to say.
Well, so I'm telling the background, but I cannot imagine if I knew what was happening, if this was a colleague or a supervisee of mine that told me that after after 2 sessions, really, she decided that he needed to break up with her. I cannot imagine a scenario where that was clinically sound. And what I'll say is really the main thing that I think when I read this email, which is this is a fucking terrible therapist that doesn't know what the fuck they're doing. There are situations, like I said, where I'll start to have those kind of questions, and maybe down the line, I'll start to explore it with a client. But my first assumption is I'm having countertransference.
Yeah.
Especially if it's after 2 sessions.
Yeah. I mean, there are relationships that I have seen that wouldn't work for me, but go on and on and on.
Yeah. I've had abusive people, or I've had individual clients who have reported that they've been in an abusive relationship. And yeah, I think in my head, I really wish that she would leave him or he would leave her or something. And I ask questions and I'll throw it out there. I'll say things like, have you ever thought about divorce? Because you don't deserve this. You don't deserve to be treated this way. You understand that you're being abused, all that kind of stuff. But it would be a long road before I just flat out told someone that I thought they should leave. That's a personal choice. I might have personal wishes, and I
may say he's not kind to you. Like I will be as subjective as I can, but I also feel like that information is, or they have put you in danger.
Yeah.
Or you are putting your partner in danger by doing like real.
Right. We're not going to beat around the bush. We're not going to not say.
We're not going to pretend it's not happening.
But in terms of the big picture decisions, right?
Yeah.
And it might be implied, I suppose, but that's not the sort of thing that a therapist, there's so many barriers in a good therapist's mind before they would even think along those lines, because like I'll have a client for years who I know is being abused by their partner, and half of every session is spent talking about that and lamenting about that. And after a certain point, I'm there's questions like, is there bias here? Am I only hearing one side of the story? But over time, I start to gain, develop an opinion. And that's the other thing. It's like, I have to tell myself, I don't know really what's happening. I'm only hearing what they're saying, what my client is saying. And maybe if I heard the other side of the story, I would modify things. I'm sure it would, but I don't know. But I know that, what I can say and what I can feel right now is like, wow, from your description, you are being treated horribly at home. This is really horrible. But to then develop this advice, this direct telling to the person to infantilize my client in terms of telling them what to do, like, hey, I'm going to tell you what to eat, or I'm going to tell you how to dress, and I'm going to tell you like whether or not you should leave someone. I mean, it's absurd. And it's a problem.
And I also notice, like, sometimes clients will be like, tell me what to do. Yeah. And I'll try and get out of that trap. But, like, sometimes I'm like, hey, it could work like this. And I often notice, like, and then there's even more, well, then what? Well, then what? And I'm like, oh, God. Like, now we're down the wrong road.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm glad they found a new, I don't know. I'm glad they left that therapist.
Yeah. So the questions you have is, how can you protect yourself from the stigma of sex work? I think Rebecca answered that question. I think what Rebecca was pointing towards is the broader problem that therapists advertise themselves in a certain way, and they might be doing so in good faith, but they don't know what they don't know. Yeah. There's a lot of people that say they specialize in trauma that I would later learn they don't know shit about fucking trauma. I mean, they appreciate that people can be traumatized, which it doesn't take a genius to have that.
I hate it when that happens.
But they don't understand how to treat trauma. They're in fact harmful to people because they don't understand triggering and re-traumatizing in therapy. And
so I have a funny story about this. So when I was in my sex therapy training, we were given a list of 10 controversial to some people things. And we were kind of supposed to put them in order of what would trigger us the least. And I read, and we're on Zoom, so I can see everybody's faces. And when I read my list, I said the thing that would trigger me the least in this list is sex work. And like the reactions, I could see people's faces. And I was really surprised of how many people.
What else was on the list?
It was heavy drinking, shoplifting, it was like it was an interesting list of things.
And so sex work was the least triggering to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why? I don't understand why people were shocked by that.
I think my age, probably.
Oh.
And it was probably not the case for other people. Other people would want to explore the sex work. I think it was like, what would you explore in therapy if these 10 things were presented? Oh. And so it was just really interesting for me of like, you know, I come from a queer culture where sex work is not somebody's biggest problem. So yeah, I think, and I just want to say like sex work is extremely stigmatized, and it's never been more present, with major athletes saying, yeah, I have an OnlyFans page where I sell pictures of my feet because it pays me better than anything else does. You know, we have come to a more public understanding of how much this is a part of our culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It really shifted over the last 15 years-ish. I remember it was evidenced, you know, this shift by, we were having an open house at the university, and there were prospective students coming, asking questions. And one prospective student asked me in a group format with a bunch of other prospective students, you know, like 30 other prospective students sitting in a circle, and they're all asking me questions. And one asked what our program's policy or stance was with therapists or students who were also in sex work. Mm-hmm. And this was, you know, like I said, 10 or 15 years ago. And just by that question in front of everyone, mm-hmm. implying a certain thing about themselves, mm-hmm. I thought was quite a thing. And, you know, I answered something along the lines of, well, we don't have an official stance, but I can tell you anecdotally that for myself and the professors that I talk with that it's not a problem. And there were no gasps from the other prospective students. And so I think this is reflective of Seattle and psychology-minded people and that kind of thing. But quite a different thing than I think the sort of conversation that would have happened 30 years ago.
Right. I'm going to a sexological bodywork presentation, so I hope to report back more about kind of what's out there. But definitely, you know, people need touch or attention in all kinds of ways. And I think we're understanding more and more, some people pay for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's the problem if you have two consenting people and it's enjoyable and fun and on the up and up?
I'm trying to think of this show. Oh my God, it was such a great TV show. He's gay and disabled, and he is still a virgin, and so he pays a sex worker. And it was such a great episode. I'm trying to track it down in my mind. But, you know, it's even portrayed more and more in media as like, you know, a part of what happens out there.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say, getting back to how therapists advertise themselves, is when it comes to something that's very important and something like, you know, being aware of sex work or being sex work friendly or being enlightened about sex work or being an expert on trauma or being LGBTQ informed, or, you know, there's different levels. There's just a statement that a therapist could make, like, I'm not bigoted against LGBTQ people. Like, oh, well, you know, praise the Lord that you're not an asshole. But there's also the layer of, do you have any? Are you queer yourself? That kind of thing. And
I've already said this, but I want to say it again. Do you understand how queer culture is different than straight culture? I will never forget this conversation that you and I had about the bases, about first base, second base, third base, and tops and bottoms and verse. And you said, you know, do you have to use these labels? And I felt like what you were saying is straight people don't have to use these labels. And I wanted... No,
that's not what I was saying. What I was saying was, I would just imagine that some people don't want to be slotted into the top. But I wouldn't know because I'm not in that culture. But because you were saying that for lesbians, that from my memory, correct me if I'm wrong, that everyone you know of slots themselves into a top or a bottom, or were you saying, or a
Verse.
dom or
Or
butch
a
and a
sub. No, not, I mean, but I remember we were talking about tops, bottoms, and verse. Like, are you a switch? All of these things.
right.
But,
And I was like, well, what if someone just wants to be on the same level? You know, it's like you're either top or bottom, or you switch between top and bottom, but no one just wants to be like, I don't want to be in that.
mushy.
Can't I just be with someone that doesn't even think along those lines of top and bottom?
Well, and yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing of like, why has queer culture developed in this way to be so nuanced in the conversation about sex roles? It's really different than your average heterosexual conversation. And, you know, that is a specificness of queer culture, that if somebody was treating somebody in that community and they missed that, that would be a big blind spot. So, like, these are the things that I just want people to know. Like, it's one thing to, like, you know, get a gay newspaper or magazine and have it in your office. It's another thing to understand how queer people interact with each other in order to find sex or find love or,
Yeah, absolutely. So the problem is that you have people that are trying to advertise themselves to get as many clients as possible, and they might be erring on the side of, you know, making claims that aren't necessarily true. Also, people don't know what they don't know. And if they don't have enough information, if they haven't been trained enough, then they might actually think of themselves as trauma experts or queer experts or whatever. So the way that you suss that out is by screening them. You don't just take their advertisement as a solid indication. So in the first session...
How are you trained? Where were you trained?
Or, well, yeah, but I don't know if people would know how to suss that out. I would just ask certain questions that you would imagine, whatever the topic is, that you would imagine only someone that actually is in the expert area that you're looking for would be able to answer. Because if you know more than the client, the therapist does, then, you know, that's a problem.
When I say what my trauma therapy chops are, I say I worked in the South Bronx with dual diagnosis population. I worked at Asian Counseling and Referral Service with all types of Asian folks, but specifically people on all sides of the Vietnam War. And the clinicians that I worked with, many of them served in the Vietnam War, which is amazing. And then I studied for 5 years with Dr. Janina Fisher, who I think is the greatest trauma trainer on the planet.
Yeah. I don't know how many clients are going to know what the fuck you're talking about.
No, but it's interesting how many clients of mine do know who Janina Fisher is, because they are desperate to have someone talk about trauma respectfully. And so there are, you know, I mean, people will name drop all kinds of names, but I would say, you know, if you're like, I can't believe how many people now are like, I only want to work with an IFS therapist. And I'm like, oh, okay. But there's something that they've heard about that theology that makes sense to them. And I'm like, great, good luck. Godspeed, go find that person.
Yeah. Internal family systems.
Yes.
And
the work of Don Schwartz.
Yeah. Schwartz. Donald Schwartz. Is it Donald? I don't want to look it up right now. But yeah. So I would ask either in the first session, or I would email, or I would have a short conversation. You know, you don't have to tell the potential therapist, I'm scrutinizing you. You can just say, hey, I just, you know, want to have a quick question before we actually schedule an appointment. On your website, you say that you are, you know, how whatever the statement was about sex work. I just wanted to know what you would do if you were working with a couple in which the wife was in sex work. What kind of approach, or how would you feel about it personally? You know, a good therapist would be able to answer in a quick way that I would imagine would indicate how they would approach it. Whereas someone that doesn't really know what they're doing might either have a problematic on the surface answer, like, well, I think it would be a serious issue that we really have to look at or something without, knowing any information. It's just like, you just know one person works in sex work. He's like, well, boy, we'd really have to drill down on that one. Or if the therapist gives a confusing answer or gets a defensive answer.
And it's okay to know that therapist isn't a good fit for you.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people that have moved through my practice all the time. And it's like, I can't be a good fit for everyone. I just can't.
But also, you didn't ask about this, anonymous patron, and dedicated Hondonian, but it's massively betraying. It would be really hard to trust another therapist in the future. I mean, you were handing yourself over to this person for a bit before you decided as a couple that she wasn't for you. And I find that interesting that you decided she wasn't for you before you even knew how bad she was. There was something about her that was a problem. And you have a loyal partner who was like incorporating that into the equation of just like, I don't think I want to be with this therapist because she's telling me to leave my partner. Anyway, let's take a break and we get back. More emails. What do you say?
Okay.
All right, we're back from the break.
We are doing a power round. We haven't really mentioned that yet, but we're like going through emails like nobody's business.
We are. The hot flash is giving you energy.
Oh my God. At least it did something good. Woo!
If you want to take your bra off,
No, thank you.
Because it looks like it was giving you some
issue. It was just like a full body stickiness.
But I would just imagine with stickiness, a bra would
like
really.
When I reached into my shirt and it was like wet to the touch on my chest, I was like, oh my God. Like, I don't know what. I mean, it's like warmer than you would think outside. I had a hat on. The heat in the car was at 72. I had sushi last night, which is a diabetic person probably wasn't the best. There are many cofactors going on.
Okay.
But it was a hot flash to end all hot flashes.
Well, let me know if you need anything.
Okay, thank you.
Anonymous listener, she says, I've been watching your videos for a couple of years now, and I'm a big fan. I'm in a long-distance relationship. By the way, I loved your episode on long-distance relationships. But you didn't mention how online sex can really help. We've explored long-distance physicality in a lot of ways, sexting, dirty photos, phone sex, as well as mutual masturbation on camera, which is a favorite. And it truly makes us feel close and bonded in the same way you'd experience from quote-unquote normal sex. I find it quite fascinating because it bridges the physical distance gap in a unique way. After we're done and doing aftercare, we both feel satisfied, comforted, and held by each other, and I can feel that the emotional bond has been strengthened and that we even look at each other differently. I truly think this is another reason why we grew so close, since we barely knew each other when we started the long-distance relationship. I would recommend this to all long-distance couples. It might take time to get over some weirdness since it's unconventional, but if you truly trust and love someone, you can create safe space for each other to be vulnerable with your sexuality and desires. It's not really a question there, Rebecca, but any thoughts on that sort of thing?
I mean, this is the modern world right now. If you all of these things are possible and enjoyable, and people like all of these things, and there's all of these devices now, like, anything from do you have a camera stand so that you're not holding the camera, to there are these remote control vibrators, to,
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, I find that kind of activity can be more intimate and more vulnerable than doing so in person. Because for a lot of people, the lights go off or they're dimmed and you're so close to each other physically that there's not a lot of visual information happening. And there can be a safety in that veil of darkness or veil of under the blankets or something. But to be just fully exposed visually to each other or partially, right? And you can't hide. I mean, that's the whole point, right? Unless I guess you're just doing audio, which is a very different kind of experience. But even that, because it's out of the ordinary, it's out of one's practice. It can be extremely bonding, very hot and erotic, and also very vulnerable and meaningful, you know, and I imagine that not a lot of people think of it that way. You know, they think of it as like second best or as not real or as disgusting or as a thing that millennials or Gen Zers would get involved in. I feel like millennials, you know, I turned around and all of a sudden they were old people.
Yes.
And now when
They're in
I
their
think
40s.
of millennials, I think of Gen Z and millennials as kind of being in one group of people, you know? Just like we're the middle-aged worker types, you know? You got the boomers and then you got us, you know, middle-aged or soon to be middle-aged, you know? Because there was a time when millennials meant a young person, like a
Babies.
teen or
Yeah.
a college kid, but now that is not the
No,
case, right?
Geriatric millennials are in their 40s.
Welcome to the club,
Yeah,
millennials.
they're achy.
It's all downhill from
They
here.
can't hear.
Soon,
They're looking for comfortable shoes.
soon the internet will be calling you boomers. You know, do you ever get that? Like someone's
yeah.
just like, "Okay, boomer," and you're like,
So not a boomer,
yeah,
but
dude, not-
okay.
But I think of it. It's funny because, you know, the reason why we're called Gen X is because, or at least partially, is because we're kind of forgotten because they're all, you know, other generations were so prominent and well represented in the media or in the zeitgeist or the understanding
Boomers have
of our
had
culture.
such a long run of it. I can't believe it. Like
Yeah.
they've gotten to dominate for so long.
Yeah. And, you know, I think there's actually statistically more of them.
That's true. And they had more money. I mean, some of this is like wealth, right? That there's a way that they dominate because their money dominates so much. And they, at this point, own more than all of us combined. Like they're just,
Yeah.
they have things. They have pensions.
Yeah. But online, it's like when there are conversations about generations, we just get lumped in with boomers. And
But we're so different.
It's just once again, we're just being like ignored as a group of people. you
Which
know?
makes us even more cranky.
I don't know.
I
Sometimes
think we're the best. I love us so much. I love Gen X and our grumpiness and the way we just get shit done. Like the way other people are like, oh my God, how does this work? And I'm like, I'm a fucking boomer. Just give me a pencil and I will like knock that shit out for you. Like we just have, our skills are unparalleled in terms of like crisis management, humor. We can put together the best music list you've ever heard.
and we're by far the most modest of all the groups. I'm just
Our ability to reference pop culture constantly. Like these are our fashion sense,
yeah. Well,
you know.
yeah. I mean, we're smack in the middle of Gen X.
Yes. I'm so
And-
solidly Gen X. It's ridiculous. Born
Yeah.
in 1970. You're 70.
70.
Yeah.
Yeah. Late, you know, almost 71.
Me too.
And right, we're in the same month of December, and so I love Gen X people. I relate to them a lot, but I don't know if I would claim that we're better than anybody.
I don't know how that's possible, Kirk. I mean, what are we doing here? The two of us together, if not signifying, exemplifying.
Yeah, but you know, Ted Cruz is also almost exactly our age, by the way.
God.
So he's Gen X.
That's so horrible.
I'm guessing Elon Musk is probably Gen X. Yeah. Yeah, so you know, there's just a lot. You know, there's a lot you can say.
A lot of variety there,
Yeah.
but so I just want to say,
Sean Combs is almost exactly our age.
when is that show coming out?
Next week,
Oh wow.
or next, or maybe 2 weeks. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay. Congratulations on pushing that out.
Yeah.
Must have been an event.
Yeah. Well, Umberto was over at the house, sitting right there until midnight last night, and we recorded, I think, a 5-hour episode. Anyway,
Wow.
middle tier patron Caitlin from Davenport. She says, "I was wondering,
Davenport.
is it Maine?
Okay.
Yeah, I don't even know. Is
I've
that
been
where the
watching-
famous?
I've been watching a lot of British TV and listening to British podcasts, and now, like, I didn't even know that like Hollywood is a Scottish name. Like, I'm learning all of these things.
Okay, I didn't know that either. Middle tier patron Caitlin from Davenport blank. We don't know where. She says, I was just wondering what Rebecca, and then in parentheses, and Kirk.
Finally, destiny is mine. Thank you.
I was wondering what Rebecca thinks of Chappell Roan.
Oh,
Are you guys
love,
members
love.
of the Pink Pony Club?
Yes.
I've recently discovered her, and I love her work as an artist, and I absolutely love it. Just curious. Thanks, Caitlin. What do you think?
Yes. So recently, the lead singer of Missing Persons came up on my feed. Do you remember her? She had
Absolutely.
couple of dyed hair. She wore this plexiglass bra that had like stripes of fabric in it. And this is back when performers only had like one or two outfits and they would wear them often. And I remember like waiting for her to come on TV so I could see the plexiglass bra.
I have one of their actual vinyls, and it's packed with...
They're amazing.
Yeah.
And when I see Chappell Roan, I get the same thing of like huge talent, voice is amazing, songs are amazing, costumes are off the hook. Like you want to see the whole, whole thing.
Have you heard of some of the, I don't know if you would call it controversy, but like newsworthiness of some of the things that she's been saying?
Like what?
When she's been talking about how she deserves to have privacy when she's out and about. Do you remember her talking about that? What do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've seen several clips of her confronting photographers in public and saying like, the last time you saw me, you were such an asshole to me. So she's clearly very confrontive. And she has all of the telltales of someone that fame came on, huge fame. Like she went from performing to 1,000 people to 300,000 people in a year. And I think considering that, she has done quite well. And it's fascinating to see like how much people love her. Like she's performing with Elton John. She's performing with Joni Mitchell. Like these things don't just happen. She also did this great duet of Last Christmas with the George Michael song with Sabrina Carpenter, who I also think is brilliant. So super kudos. That level of fame is very, very difficult to manage. We see that over and over in our culture. And I just want to put a huge bubble of love around her and protect her. And I hope that Brandy Carlisle is like, you see them out and about together a lot. And I'm like, please, 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 like somebody protect her and love her because, oh my God, I just think of blessed memory, someone like Kurt Cobain, who had that level of star power and songwriting and performing ability and didn't make it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not easy. So one of my favorite drag queens died over the weekend. It's not been disclosed how, but this queen's name was the Vivian, and she was the first queen to win the British Drag Race series. And she could sing, she could dance. She did this amazing Donald Trump impersonation that was just off the hook because it was a man impersonating a woman impersonating Donald Trump. Like it was so complex. And it just reminded me how this level of talent is so fucking fragile. And it's hard. It's just really hard. So I can't wait to see her at the Grammys. I can't wait to see what Chappell Roan does next. Like I am hungry for it because it's so intoxicating, and some of her songs on that album that are my favorite don't get played a lot. Like her darker stuff is really interesting. She's so varied. I could go on and on and on. This is a really funny conversation I had with my dad's wife, who was like, you know, that really famous person, the famous girl that everybody's talking about. And I was like, Chappell Roan? And she was like, no. And I was like, Sabrina Carpenter. Like I just started listing off all these amazing women. And it turns out it was, oh my God, the Eras Tour, the most famous woman in the world right now.
Taylor Swift?
It was Taylor Swift.
Uh-huh.
But I was like, oh my God, what an era we're in that I could just like name off countless women who are...
Could you have done that 10 years ago?
Not in the same way. I could have done that in college. I mean, we were in college when it was like Tracy Chapman, like...
Well, yeah, I mean, when you're actually young, you're going to be tapped in, but it sounded like you're saying rather recently you've been more tapped in.
Yeah. The level of...
Is it because social media or something?
Well, I don't know.
Because E's not into this kind of stuff.
No. The level of songwriting, the level of songs that get kind of mass produced tend to not be great songs for a long time.
Yeah, I
And-
guess it is. I hadn't really thought about that. I'm sure people have thought maybe this is what you're getting at. Is like your Billie Eilishes and your Chappell Roans and your Brandy Carlisles are more grassroots, if you will, down to earth. They're not created by a corporate label like your Katy Perry's and your Britney Spears and that kind of thing. I mean, these are Katy Perry and Britney Spears are real human beings themselves. They're not plastic and they have their own talent, right? But Chappell Roan, Billie Eilish, they are very much creating themselves independent of the music industry and become huge prior to that. I mean, I'm not as familiar with Chappell Roan's rise, but I definitely know Billie Eilish's story, and so it feels different. It feels more like the artist has ownership, and that's what I wanted to say about Chappell Roan and her reaction to the media, and Billie Eilish had her own version of this, of just rejecting the machine of body dysmorphia and the need to be sexy and ultra, hyper feminine or something. And she would play around with stuff like that, but she would wear baggy clothes and people would be like, she's fat now or something. And I'm sure it wasn't a walk in the park, but the approach to it seemed much more human and feminist, really. But the thing that Chappell Roan and that chapter of reacting against, and if you don't know, I don't know if it was a series of posts or just one post, but what I saw from my distance point of view was there was this one post, I don't know on what platform, but she's just at home talking to the camera, and she's just like, look, people, fans, I'm glad you're a fan, but if I'm out and about and you just run up to me, and I can't remember exactly what she was saying, but she was saying, you don't deserve to just invade my space and demand that I interact with you or take a picture with you or a selfie. I can't remember exactly what she was saying, but it was something along those lines. And a lot of people, because of sexism and ageism, as far as I can tell, and just the way that things have been for so many years, they saw her as being this entitled bitch, you know what I mean? And what I saw as a content provider myself, and I don't have a problem with people running up to me when it does happen, which is once every couple of years. I'm delighted by it, honestly. But I do understand what it feels like to have a lot of eyes on you, you know what I mean? And people wanting to interact with you, online and that kind of stuff, in a very small way compared to Chappell Roan. And the complicated nature of how you react to that, right? Because it's like, well, these people are actually your fan base. It's your economic base. This is what's giving you your career and your buzz and your energy. And how do you draw a boundary with that? And, especially for a young woman to feel like she has the right to do it and was able to say that because they've all thought it, all the previous artists who were in her position had thought it and had said it behind closed doors, but they were told or were scared or whatever they would never just directly say, hey, fans, I love you, but stop it with the invading of my space. And this notion, that people have that I've never agreed with, that people say, well, you're famous now. You don't deserve, the whole paparazzi thing. Right, it's like, well, you're famous now. Boo hoo hoo. And I find that to be just a psychopathic approach to things. It's like, so just because someone is successful, they don't deserve human rights or they don't deserve human decency. And I find it to be such a jealous perspective of, well, you have what I desperately want, so fuck you, take the good with the bad. And I just find that to be an abhorrent way of looking at things, a dehumanizing way of looking at things.
Yeah, if we want people to stay sane and stay with us for a long time, we need to treat them very, very well.
Right. So the hope that it gives me is that young people today grew up in a different media environment, one in which there's a more sophisticated critique of it and also more contact with the human being who is the famous person, and what it gives me hope is that, and I think there has been I was watching, what was it? It was something about the aughts. Oh, it was a documentary about Lindsay Lohan and about how out of control the paparazzi were back then. And I don't know if this is true, but my impression is the paparazzi isn't nearly as bad as it was 20 years ago. So that, I don't know why that is, if that is true, but I wonder if a part of that has to do with, I mean, I'm sure part of it has to do with economics of just like, it just doesn't pay as much as before because people are taking their own photos and putting it on Instagram. So you don't need paparazzi to take pictures of famous people anymore. But also, I would hope that as a society, we just stopped.
We got burnt out.
Well, we would see pictures like what looked to be a paparazzi style picture in Us magazine, and we would go, well, that's disgusting. Why are you bothering, Britney Spears as she's just trying to get a bite to eat? Like, and why are you sneaking a telephoto lens of her while she isn't dressed to the nines and making fun of her belly or something? I mean, sure, there's still that, but I think that we're more sophisticated because we've learned from our mistakes. And I wonder if young people and people in the future of all generations will just have a different understanding of what it's like to be a famous person, and that they're human beings and that they deserve to have some privacy and they deserve to be able to walk to the store and not be harassed, even if it is their fans. You know what I mean?
So this is making me think about how in Palm Springs there is a covenant that all houses are one story. And it is because so many famous people owned houses there when it began that it allowed privacy for everyone. No one could...
Every house?
I think so.
Is one story?
Yeah, for most of Palm Springs.
That's interesting.
And it was because at the time that Palm Springs became what it is, Hollywood stars needed to be within 2 hours of Los Angeles. And they found this town called Palm Springs. And by keeping all of the houses at one level, no one could spy in on anyone else's house. And, people have been craving privacy forever.
Yeah. Yeah. And just being treated like a human being.
Well, and it reminds me of one fan who said they saw me in Olympia but didn't approach. And I was like, that is so sweet.
Would you mind if they approached?
No, it would have been fine, but it was so funny. She's like,
would you like it because I like it when people, because like I said, it happens. I mean, one part of the equation is I never leave my house. So it's like, but when it has happened, it's really a highlight to my day because it so rarely occurs, Well, like just yesterday, I was at the grocery store and I ran into one person that I knew in the parking lot. And while I was talking to her, someone else that I had only met once but wanted to connect with again saw me in the parking lot. And I was like, this is the most random connection I've had in I don't know, since the pandemic began. Like the idea that you could run into two people was so overwhelming. Well, you know how Seattle's a small town in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
So if people see you in public, you're okay?
Unless I look really grumpy, yes. You could probably tell if I'm flustered and hot and having a hot flash and I have too many bags and they're falling all over the place. Yeah. Although if I do have too many bags, please help me carry them because I often have too many bags.
So let's take a break, and there's another question about Chappell Roan. Let's do it.
That's so interesting.
All right, we're back from the break. So anonymous patron from Seattle, they say, Dear Kirk and Rebecca, I was wondering if you could talk about what is unfolding with Chappell Roan right now. She is a queer pop star who had an explosive rise to fame earlier this year after 10 years in the industry virtually unknown. Unlike many of today's pop stars, she was not a child star and does not have any family connections in the industry. I mention this because I think this has resulted in her being less compliant and more willing to challenge the norms of the entertainment industry. So maybe they're getting at what we were talking about. She has gained notoriety for being outspoken in interviews and on social media, demanding that the public respect her right to privacy. So I think I'll just skip ahead and just say that I think we already answered this question. It reminds me a lot of Sinead O'Connor's career nosedive, and I can't help but think that in 20 years we will all be looking back to see how horribly Chappell Roan is being treated by the public right now. That sort of thing. Yeah.
So I think this is a Joni Mitchell quote where she says, the point of an artist is not to be compliant to the music industry. That's not when interesting music happens. And so you get someone like Chappell Roan who's not compliant. And I hope that there's room for that. And I think of Lady Gaga, like she found her way to be not compliant.
Yeah.
And she's taken time off and done other things.
Yeah. Jeremiah from Utah, he says, I'm a brand new therapist in private practice for the first time. My prior work was in inpatient and intensive outpatient work. So they were a therapist in inpatient and intensive outpatient, which sounds like recovery. Mm-hmm. And Jeremiah says, I'm a new therapist in private practice. I was just informed by my boss. Wait, you have a boss in private practice?
Sometimes people join like umbrella practices.
So I was just informed by my boss that a client of mine requested to be switched therapist, and I am being plagued by terrible thoughts that I am a failure and feel awful about it. How did you come to be comfortable with clients discounting therapy because of it being a bad fit or potentially even being offended by you? So that's the end of the email, but there's an assumption in there. Because
I see this, I just saw a post like this online that was very similar, that one client rejected me, therefore I shouldn't be a therapist. And that is the hardest, that is a hard part about this work, is that you get rejected often. And it's just kind of a question of fit. You might not be a good fit for that one person. Yeah. So when I was building my practice, this professional coach I was working with at the time would just remind us over and over again that to have a kind of full-time practice in Seattle, you just need 20 to 30 people that like you as a therapist. And in a city of 1 million people, the rate, it's pretty high that's going to happen. Now with teletherapy, like you're addressing an entire state, or potentially with the multi-pack system, you're addressing several states. So are you going to be a good fit with everyone? No. Is there something to learn from when people move on? Of course. People move on for all kinds of reasons. Does that mean if someone moves on from you that you should never practice therapy again? That's not what that's saying. That's saying that you're a bad fit with one person. Mm-hmm. And that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, this is a field where your ego gets bruised all the time. And also people feel safe to reject you. I mean, there are tons and tons of people out there that can't let go of all different aspects of their life, but they can let go of their therapist. So I would just kind of take a step back and say, you know, are you a good fit for other people in the practice?
Yeah. This is something that as a supervisor is just a matter of clockwork, that eventually I'm going to be talking with a supervisee about this, because there's going to be a client that will terminate either after the first session, or they won't come to a second session, or they won't schedule a fourth session or something. Or they'll just flat out say, I don't like you and I don't want to work with you anymore, or whatever. And it's particular at the beginning of your career for a couple of reasons. One, frankly, you're just not as good of a therapist as you're going to be. And, you know, I'll speak from experience myself. My very first couple client, I was so utterly nervous. I don't know why. I mean, I guess I could imagine why. But I was 100 times more nervous. I had already worked with, you know, maybe 10 or 20 individual clients. And my first few individual clients, let's say I was like a 3 out of 10 nervous-wise. Well, my first couple, I was like a 10 out of 10. And I was not a good therapist in that session. And guess what? They didn't come back. And I desperately wanted them to come back. I also needed the couple and family hours because I was, you know, in the marriage and family therapy program, and in my internship, I needed a certain number of couple and family. So I really wanted them to come back, and they did not, you know, come back. So that was, I can tell you, because I was a shitty therapist in the moment because I was too nervous, one, and two, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing, and that's okay, you know. Sucks to be them, really. It's just like, if they had met me a year later, I think they would have been better served. Hopefully they found someone else. And, you know, I feel kind of bad about that, but there's no other way to do it. You know, at some point the way our system works, you have to start somewhere, you know what I mean? So there's that. But also in the beginning of your career, you tend to get a lot of new clients, and new clients are a lot more likely to terminate. The average, I don't know if this still holds up, but I remember hearing in the past that the average length of therapy is 5 sessions.
Yeah.
So that includes, people that are in therapy for 5 years, and it includes like a huge number of people that are only in therapy for one
session
to 1 to 3 sessions.
And like the reason that people have told me that they were terminating with me, someone once told me I looked at the clock too much. Somebody, I've heard that I'm not warm enough. I've heard that I'm not instructive enough. There's all of these things where it's like, that's who I am. I'm a Capricorn. I'm looking at the clock right now. I don't even know why. This is just part of who I am. So there's so many ways that we are not a good fit. And the point of therapy is that that person finds someone that they can disclose all kinds of intimate relationship or intimate facts about their lives with. And that's a tough fit to find. Yeah. It's okay if you're not the right person for that client.
And the other thing, as what Rebecca said, is that with my supervisees, I always... once we get through the emotional part of it, which, can take a while because it's hard, when you enter into the field, you intellectually understand that this could happen. But when it happens, especially again in the beginning of your career, before you have any confidence, because you won't have any confidence until you're about 5 years in, it's devastating. You're looking for any shred of evidence that you're a good therapist or that you're in the right career or that you're going to be successful or something. And when something like this happens, when there's so little to offset it, because when you're doing well as a therapist, especially in the beginning, there's not a lot of concrete evidence that you're doing well. Sometimes it has to be highlighted by a mentor, like, hey, you have 15 clients that are consistently coming to you and are not terminating. That means you're in all likelihood doing something right. But so it has to be emphasized,
My sign that I'm doing well is when clients will say, I will drive through traffic to get to you. And I'm always like, oh, really?
Yeah,
There's no greater compliment. You'll drive through Seattle traffic to get to make it. Well, that's amazing.
Even if they don't say that, because, just think about for yourself how strapped for time one is and how much, to some extent, a pain in the ass a therapy session is, especially like in those weeks when you're stressed and, you're stretched pretty thin time-wise. For a client to allocate that time to talk to you, it means you're doing not only just something mildly right, but something like
and I'll say that all the time.
Thing.
Like the fact that you're showing up is huge. So many people don't show up.
Yeah. So
and the fact that someone doesn't want to show up is their choice, and that's okay. I mean, we have addressed this in several different ways, but the act of individuation, the act of saying no, these are all really important acts. If someone says no to me, that's okay. I'm not going to chase them down.
No. So after we get over the emotional grieving, then I always ask the question, because we don't usually know, and Jeremiah from Utah, it sounds like he doesn't know either, as to exactly why the client requested to be switched to a different therapist. There's not a specific, and even if a client did reveal that, you don't necessarily know if that's the truth, because they might be blunting what they really want to say, or they might not know exactly why. They might just have a vague understanding, because you might be the very first therapist they've ever been to. They might not even know how to detect what a good therapy session is. You can't know. So a lot of times we don't know why, a client terminates in a weird or an early way or abrupt way or something. And so the question that I always ask is, well, what do you imagine? Once we get over the emotional part of it, then I ask the question, if there was something that you could have done differently, if you could have improved that would have helped to retain this client, what would that be? Not that we're blaming you, but if there is something to learn from this, then what is there to learn? That's an important thing. For me, for example, with the couple client, the thing that I learned was that I shouldn't be trying so hard, that I'm tripping over myself, and I need to return to the basics of listening to people. And the next time I had a couple, and I was like, because before that first session, I was frantically flipping through my couple therapy handbook and trying to find theory and words of wisdom to help me with the client. And I couldn't find anything. And I was so nervous, I couldn't even really comprehend what I was reading. And that was me trying too hard and too desperate and looking in the wrong places. What I needed to do was look inward and look towards, well, what would I want? Well, what I would want is someone to listen and understand. And so the next time, that's what I did. So that's what I learned. And I was probably 100% responsible for them not coming to the second session. And so, but I don't know that. Maybe they just moved out of it. Maybe they died. I don't even know. I mean, maybe they got in a car wreck and no one informed me. I mean, I just literally, they just, disappeared. I don't know. But if there's something to learn, what's there to learn? And so to use that, and that's, as a professional, what we should always be doing.
Right.
We should always be asking the question,
so much
like,
learning.
what if there's something to, I don't know if this is actually what the universe is trying to teach me, but if the universe is trying to teach me something, what might that be? And let's talk about it and let's think about it. And so for you, Jeremiah, that's what you, after you get over the emotional grieving and the sadness and the crying and the difficulty, and you get support.
And at this point, I have terminated, or people have terminated with me so many times. There's like huge chunks of people I don't remember. Like every 7 years, how you go through your files. And I don't know if you do this anymore. I still have paper files. And I will look at names sometimes or read through whole case presentations and be like, I have no idea who this person is. Like everything about this case has completely left my memory.
Yeah.
And it's, some
that happened to me one time in a really bad way, that a client called me and somehow got a hold of me, and a former client, and informed, it was a family, and informed me that the daughter had died and gave me the names and gave me a little bit of detail. And I was talking on the phone, and I figured something will jog my memory, but it didn't come to me. And so eventually I had to say, it's like, I'm sorry, I don't remember you guys, but I'm really sorry that this happened, and blah, blah, blah. And it was, maybe 10 years prior or something like that. And I noted the name and went to my file and started to read through it and instantly remembered who they were. Because I don't know about you, but I don't think about my clients through their name.
Right. There's something about their story.
Yeah, because I think, like when I
Or
think,
like sometimes you have so many clients with the same name, like it's insane.
Yeah. Yeah. So with people in my personal life, like my brother or you or my wife or something, there's a lot of opportunity to associate the person with their identifier. It's like, oh, Rebecca's coming over. Or I would, hey, I was talking with Stacy the other day. As therapists, we don't have those conversations very often, maybe in consultation, but that's pretty rare. And we're probably not even going to use names.
Sometimes we're just using initials.
Right. So we have a really robust memory center around who these people are and the way that they move and the way that they talk and their backstory and everything like that. But we don't associate it with their name on their birth certificate, And so I think that I ran into that, and I instantly remembered who, because in my head, as I'm being informed about the death of this daughter, I'm thinking, well, I must have only worked with them a few sessions because I don't remember these people. It seems like I would have remembered, right? I go to the file. I'd worked with this family for a few years, and I instantly, and it wasn't an unusual name, it was a relatively common name. And so I called her back and said, I'm so sorry. Of course I remember you guys. And oh my God, I'm so sorry that she died. I mean, I have so many memories of talking to your daughter. And so I agree that it's sometimes hard to remember things just by looking at a name is the thing. Anyway, do you have time to answer some quick ones?
Yeah. So I just realized my watch is the battery's dead. So
12:06.
12:06. So I've got 24 minutes.
Okay. Patron Rose from Eugene, she says, I am a soon-to-be licensed registered associate who is primarily interested in working with adult individuals who have experienced complex trauma. Just chiming in, soon-to-be licensed registered associate.
So that means they've just graduated.
Yeah, but that's not how we in Washington we would say. We would say just a licensed associate.
So they're not in this state. They're in another state.
Yeah, they're in Eugene, Oregon. But anyway, they're going to graduate soon and be an associate licensed individual. I'm soon to be, and I'm
which I just learned. So in most states that means they have 2 years, but if you're not in a KCREP accredited program, it's much longer now to get your license.
Not if you're MFT. It's still 2 years. Meaning that if you're not from an accredited
KCREP accredited program, at least at Washington State, it's much longer to get your license. For people who are looking at programs, there's a whole dynamic. If you want to go into private practice.
Yeah, well, I just would recommend getting a master's from a non-accredited program by the professional organization that you're getting into.
Yeah.
For that reason. Anyway. I'm a soon-to-be licensed associate who is primarily interested in working with adult individuals who have experienced complex trauma. I'd like to get more training under my belt and have been researching different options. It seems that good trainings are expensive, and I want to choose wisely. What sort of trainings should I seek out, Rebecca?
Well, so some trainings have scholarships for people early in their career, so please look into that. So there's a lot of programs around trauma right now. I did sensory motor psychotherapy. Dr. Janina Fisher has her own certificate in trauma-focused therapy right now. Kathy Melchiotti has a certificate. Many people. IFS has trauma-focused trainings if you can get into them. There's a lottery system. So there's a lot of stuff out there. And unfortunately, we live in a field where you will continue to spend money. The good trainings can be really expensive. I mean, dialectical behavior therapy is really a trauma-focused. What's the one I'm thinking of? This one.
The EMDR?
EMDR is another trauma-focused option. And there's also you can start out just taking a one-day training and see if that works for you and if you like it, and then continue to go on. I would start that way because a lot of people, go in to do the full certification having not really experimented that much with the different ones. And they can be really, really different. Yeah.
Yeah. So I will just reiterate what you're saying in that there are trainings out there that are probably more suited to you than others. And so asking around and taking in what Rebecca is saying is a good idea. But also the sentiment that Rebecca is saying that, look, trainings and to be a therapist, there's going to be some expenses. And it's just something you have to accept. To be in a business or to have a career, it requires some investment, and some of that investment has to do with investing in trainings. And it can be quite a shock. You can be looking at a training that can cost thousands of dollars, and when you're just out of graduate school, you don't have a lot of disposable income, and maybe that's something to think about in terms of budgeting. You don't need to do those kinds of big, expensive trainings right away.
Right. No one would expect you as an associate to be certified in anything.
And the nature of being an associate is you have a supervisor. Lean on that. You can really push your supervisor, maybe even to learn new things so that they can mentor you and help you. Because someone's paying for that supervisor. It might be you, or there might be the employer that's paying for that supervision. But that supervisor is being paid. That was one of the things that I would tell my supervisees and my students, because they would always apologize for asking me to do my job. Students would come to me and they'd say after class, or they would email me and they're like, sorry to bother you, but I just want to, and I'd be like, I want to remind you, I literally get paid to respond to your questions. It's my job. You pay money to be in this class, and a good portion of that money goes directly to me. So you don't walk up after ordering a Big Mac at McDonald's and say you didn't get the Big Mac. You don't go to the employee at McDonald's and say, yeah, I'm terribly sorry, but could I bother you to maybe actually make the thing that I actually just bought? You don't do that. Supervisors and professors they're just that. We're paid, our salaries are paid by you. So you deserve to ask questions, and a supervisor and a professor that doesn't understand that needs to be fired and rejected, because that's a clear understanding of what's happening. So,
well, and sometimes the agencies will pay for you to get certified in some of these. Like, it's worth,
right. It's in their interest, not only to have a trained therapist, but also to have a marketable therapist on their roster. Anyway, patron Amanda from Seattle, she says, "Hi, Kirk and Rebecca!" ! I am curious if any of you have experience with AEDP therapy. Do you know what AEDP therapy?
Please.
It's Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy.
Oh.
Developed by Diana Fosha. And I looked this up earlier. It addresses trauma, loss, and other serious emotions. And it uses attachment theory, body-focused approaches, and others. So to answer your question, patron Amanda, no. Neither one of us have heard of it. And I'll tell you that there's a lot, and I don't know, maybe this is a new trend and we're out of touch, but in my experience, there's just a lot of forms. There's something like, this was 25 years ago, that there were over 400 individual modes of therapy.
Right.
But today there's probably got to be 1,000 or something.
Yeah. It is worth it for a clinician to develop something that they can develop trainings and marketing and books and all of these things. Meaning that if you're trying to carve out a career and notoriety and money, it's within your interest to develop your own individual name for your own kind of therapy, right? Yeah.
And so there's a lot of those, and some of them survive, some of them don't. But there's a lot of really small, obscure, probably worthy, but not necessarily well understood or well known by a lot of therapists. Yeah. So you say, as a newer therapist, I'm trying to find my professional identity. This modality seems like a great fit. I'm wondering if there are any experiences with this. Thanks for your wisdom. It's absolutely invaluable to me. My dogs are barking.
That's not a style of therapy.
Yeah. So, go for it if it fits. What I would encourage every therapist, I was going to say novice, but I would say everybody, to do is, you mentioned, Amanda, that, I found out that AEDP uses attachment theory, body-focused approaches, and others. The way that I've developed my understanding of therapy and how humans work is by going to those foundational theories and fully understanding those. Therefore, when I use integrated approaches or learn integrated approaches, then I understand them much better. Like to learn about emotion-focused therapy only without understanding attachment theory fully, and because you could get the overview of attachment theory pretty quickly, but it's really complicated actually, and it's deep, and there's a lot of research, and there's a lot of theory, and it's a paradigm shift. It's pretty complicated. It's not just that, kids attached to their parents. It's complicated, and so understanding that I think helps to make us therapists better therapists, frankly. Then when you learn these integrations, it just further enhances that, where if you just learn the integration, it's sort of like if you just learned cognitive behavioral therapy without understanding cognitive therapy and behavioral therapy, I think it's missing something. Now, it takes a shitload of time and effort, and sometimes you don't even know where to start because you don't have a mentor, or you don't know where to look, or it's confusing. And that's the way it was for me. I mean, I didn't have anyone really, and I was kind of aimless for the first 10 years of my career, and I was seeking things, but I didn't know where to look, and I didn't know how to pull things together. I didn't even understand what I was reading half the time, or more than that. But I think it's worth aspiring for. Anonymous patron, he says, can you talk about starting a support group? I work with people experiencing houselessness in Los Angeles. I want to create a support group for LGBTQ plus people experiencing houselessness at the day center that I work at, but I've never run a support group. I have only attended myself, but never while I was homeless myself. So I don't know if you know anything about this, because I don't really, because I didn't, I mean, I've only done kind of work like this in the past, but do you know, Rebecca, any advice on how to start a support group?
Well, so are we talking about like how to theoretically set up a group, or are we talking about? Okay.
I think from the very beginning, it sounds like Anonymous Patron. Okay. It's just like, I have this urge to do this, and I don't know where to start.
So the theorist on groups who used to be the basis, I don't know if he still is, was Yalom. So things to consider would be, is it a closed group or is it an open group? To know if it's an open group, your group will always be at the beginning group dynamics of kind of more of a psychoeducational group. If you want it to go deeper, it should probably be a closed group, but that's really difficult with an unhoused population.
What's the difference between open and closed?
So an open group would mean anybody can pop in and out. A closed group means that you're agreeing to 8 weeks or 10 weeks at this time.
Or you're going to screen people as they enter.
Yeah. I mean, really, all you need to do to start a support group is to name a time and a place. It's helpful if you have some framework about what you're doing. Is it psychoeducational? Are you reading something at the beginning of every group? What's going to tie it together? Is this a place where people tell their stories? Well, if they tell their stories, there needs to be trust present. How do you do that? Are you going to state the group rules at the beginning of every group? Yep. Groups are complicated. Groups can split on each other. Are there rules about not dating other members of the group, or
how do you deal with crosstalk or conflict
side conversations? Yeah. So,
do you have experience running groups yourself? The other question is, because there's not an explicit statement from Anonymous Patron that he is a therapist, so they might just be a different sort of worker at a day center. So I don't even know if he's asking for a therapy group. He could just be looking for a non-clinical support group and forming that. So that would be another question, is what sort of group is it exactly, and how do you understand that, and how do you advertise that? Because even as a therapist, you could create a non-clinical support group, one that you weren't providing clinical services and they weren't clients of yours. You were just setting a time and you were there facilitating non-clinical conversations of support for each other.
And group work used to be so much more the norm than it is now, and people are kind of desperate for community.
Yeah. The other thing that I'm sure you've experienced is that getting a group going and sustaining it is hard. Really hard in most circumstances. There are some circumstances where it can be really easy, like if it's an inpatient or you just tap into a need in a community that people are just dying to have. But typically, 9 times out of 10, people that really know what they're doing and have a lot of support and have a lot of know-how and maybe even know how to market things pretty well, it might take years before they get more than 2 people to show up consistently. And then it might be years before they feel confident that it's not going to die because of half the group getting sick, and then only 2 people show up, and then those people are like, why are we here? And then they never come back. Like, I've never done this myself in private practice. I've had groups when I worked at agencies and didn't really have a vested interest in it succeeding or not, because my my career didn't depend on these groups succeeding. And the groups tended to do well because they were in location, like at a high school, and the kids wanted to get out of class, and so they would come to the group and that kind of stuff. or it was in alcohol and addiction recovery, and they were mandated to go to the group and that kind of, or they were, intimate partner violence perpetrators convicted and sentenced to come to my group, so they had to. So I didn't really, I've never tried to get a group going in private practice, mainly because I understand how much of a pain in the ass it is. And you typically don't make a lot of money out of it because the expectation is that it's not going to cost nearly as much as just a flat out session. And insurance doesn't cover it often. Right.
And also, like, at this point, is it online or in person? It's really hard to get people to come in person these days.
I bet you online would make it a lot more likely that people would show up.
Right. But then, like, do you have rules like you have to keep your camera on?
Also, that would really change the feeling, the vibe of the group if it's online, right? If you've never met people in person, I would just imagine. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
But
have you ever had a group in private practice?
No, because it's so hard to set a time.
Would you want to if you could have one?
Sure. I miss group work so much. I mean, that's part of why I do these 6-hour trainings is it's kind of like a one-time group. And the time that I got to do a 3-day training, it's like so dynamic to watch the group.
It's such an intense experience for everyone. Whether I would love to be a client. I hear it.
Now I'm begging, because it's the online trainings always sell out and the in-person ones are always sketchy. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm begging the organizations that I work with, can we at least try one in-person training this year? And they're like, oh God, okay. But I miss people so much. I mean, the work is so much more dynamic, or I barely do any online work with clients because I like working in person. It's such a different dynamic. The feedback loop for me is so different. I know some people...
You're such a boomer.
Which is weird because I barely like people, but...
I'm the same. I talk with Bob on the podcast too, and he is 100% online. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I've just resisted or if I'm just too used to in-person conversations. But like even podcasting, there are times...
Yeah, I drive up here. It's not like I could record from my home.
It would be so much easier. And
you make me come up here.
It'd be more convenient for me as well.
You could be in your pajamas.
Yeah. But I just... no. And if that makes me an old fuddy-duddy, then fine. I imagine that has partly to do with it because I just didn't grow up talking to people through a screen. But I also just think it's an appreciation of the 3D human space we evolved to thrive within.
Yeah, and I'll also say, it was going to see Black Panther in concert, full symphony orchestra there, live percussionists.
Right, if you watched that on a YouTube video, it would have had 1% the impact.
Yeah. I mean, it was electric. I haven't felt that alive. I mean, both E and I were talking afterwards, I feel like someone just sent an electric bolt through me. I've just had such an experience. And because it was in person, and the movie was huge, and the symphony was huge, and the talking drumist, soloist, specialist from Africa is walking through the audience, and people are screaming and yelling, and there's just this dynamic of oh right, people together. It's so much more interesting than me sitting in my house watching Missing You and being completely confused, but also being this is great TV, but being I can barely follow it and there's no one for me.
Missing You?
Oh, are you watching it?
I don't know. What is it?
It's from Britain, or at least it has an all British cast. And it is a very complex plot about a detective whose father was a detective who was murdered, whose boyfriend goes missing 10 years ago, and then there's this other subplot going on about this guy who's abducted and they're trying to extort money from him. And then there's a kid whose mother is probably somehow involved in the abduction scheme. And there's so many plot lines that I'm I can't quite follow what's going on, but I also can't stop watching. But I'm watching this alone being does this make sense to anybody else? I'm totally confused. But yeah, I can go days. I mean, I see people in my work, but in the pandemic, there would be days and days.
But I'm glad to hear that you are. So you have to push your clients to meet in person, probably, right?
Not all of them. I mean, I really advertise myself that I have one day a week that I'm available for online therapy. Besides that, I do in person.
I think you're one of the only therapists that I know anecdotally that is doing that. That's a majority in person.
Yeah, I couldn't do the work. I was so sick during the pandemic. I don't know if you've talked about my impacted poop story.
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. I got so physically ill from all of that sitting and not moving.
Yeah, there's a certain way you sit when you're on Zoom.
Yeah, my eyes started to give out.
Yeah, your back.
Yeah,
your neck.
Yeah, I have to sit now in a chair that has full neck support, like all the way. Like the chair I'm sitting in now is perfectly fine for what we're doing, but when I work, my chair goes above my head, both for Zoom calls and in the office. Like I have to protect my body so much at this point. And some of that is that old shoulder injury that I told you about when I was in a car accident when I was a kid. And I walked around with a broken clavicle for 24 hours and nobody noticed. I have to protect my body so much at this point. I got to work for another 10 to 20 years. Like,
yeah. And so crunched over a laptop,
so bad,
trying to conform to the video.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about my stigmatism, even though I've got like blue lenses and there's a crystal in here, like it doesn't help.
Crystal?
Yeah. For my stigmatism, there's crystals in here that keep my eye, try to keep my eyes.
Crystals in your eye?
Crystals in the glasses.
Oh. Crystals in the glasses?
Yeah, these are like $1,000 glasses. I once dropped these glasses in a concert and I broke down sobbing and people helped me find them because I was like, they're so expensive I can't replace them.
When did glasses get so expensive? Because
when did I get so blind?
When I was a kid, I've been wearing contacts and glasses since the 5th grade. And, they were always expensive. It was a big deal to get new lenses. My dad's insurance through Boeing, Aetna, would only give each of us one set of lenses a year. So we got either one set of contacts or one set of glasses. So it was a big deal. But about, 10 years ago, I was buying glasses and, I'm looking at the glasses and we start going through the lens options and everything. And then they're like, okay, that'll be $1,100. And I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, for me,
I was like, wait a second. I'm not like a am I in a celebrity glasses place? Like, I'm not spending $1,100 on glasses. But that's the going rate for glasses.
These are bifocals. They have the sun tinting thing. They've got crystals in them.
But even if you just buy the standard, because I don't have any of that stuff. I just have regular ass glasses. But if you want glasses that aren't just like the kinds of frames that you'll find on the corner, being sold from some
and what's
some
hysterical
box.
Is I'm looking over here, you have 2 sets of glasses.
Those are my reading glasses.
Prescription?
No, these are Amazon. These are $10.
Okay.
And one is for reading a book.
Okay.
And the other is for looking at things really close. Like if I have a weird thing. Have you noticed this weird thing on my finger, by the way?
Yes. Is that a blood blister?
Yeah. It was a wart that was burnt off. But it really makes me look like a witch or something, Like
I approve.
I
approve of your witchy finger.
It's like, yeah, come here, dearie. It needs like some hair growing out of it or something. But it's a real gnarly looking thing. It's a real deep purple.
Did you notice this? I got my tattoo redone.
Ooh.
Yeah.
What is it?
It's a bat.
Yeah. Is it a famous bat or is it just a bat?
No, it's just cute. It's super cute. It went from being a really simple line drawing. But getting this tattoo, I was like, this could be my last tattoo. Like, I had to hold my arm out, even though like everything was supported. I'm like, I'm too old to hold my arm in this awkward position for an hour plus. It took me like 2 days for my arm to feel normal again. It was like, it's full color, so it was super goopy healing and the whole thing. I was like, I'm too old for this shit. I gotta go. So let's find a way to say goodbye.
All right. Well,
we've complained about all our health problems.
We got almost through half of all the emails, which is quite an accomplishment, way better than we've done before.
Sometimes we only get through like 2.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
it's really scary out there between the fires and the bird flu and renaming the Gulf of Mexico. I just want you guys to like focus on loving yourself and loving your friends and clear out time where you're being gentle with yourself. Lots of deep breathing.
Let's all do some.
How about this? In with the goddess, out with the patriarchy. Bringing it back. Bringing it back. I hope I offended lots of people with that one. And I hope I brought joy to lots of other people.
Who doesn't want to breathe in the goddess?
Chappell Roan, if you are listening, breathe in the goddess and breathe out the patriarchy.
Can you imagine if she was listening?
HOTTOGO. I probably just sang it. I think I just sang hoot instead of hot.